Hi there, I'm Dr. Chris Moore and I'm the Programme Lead for the undergraduate degree in biomedical science at UE Bristol. I teach anatomy and physiology and lead on a few modules, and what I'm going to do today is talk through a showcase experiment of something that I'm tinkering with using Microsoft Teams. Now, Teams in use across the world has increased massively. There are obviously competitors for online meetings and classes such as Zoom. And then there are, of course, the embedded video meeting type tools within some of the virtual learning environments that the higher education sector in particular, but also some FE colleges and so on use within their VLEs, things like Blackboard Collaborate. Now, UE uses Blackboard as its VLE, and as we think more about the impact of online activities and community building and engagement of students online when they're not in person, we have to think about what to take forward with us and what to leave behind, and what to return to, and what can be most beneficial for more of a synergized student experience. Because what we're looking for is obviously for students to get the degree outcomes that they need to secure employment in careers that they are looking to get into, looking to make a future in, but also about getting them ready for those careers and that employability and going out there and making a positive difference. Now, this is where VLEs come in and are a little bit muddy, I suppose. Depending on where you are, you may use Blackboard, you may use Canvas, Aula, Moodle, a whole range of VLEs are out there. They all have different functionalities, they all have lots of pros and cons. They each play to, in my opinion at least, different strengths, whether that's how they look, whether it's ease of access, whether it's community, whether it's the ways that they hold the information for the students and the ways that they deliver the content or assess. They all have different strengths and weaknesses, but they're all very different. Now, when you go out into employment, you may be faced with different procurement systems or auditing systems. There's always going to be a different platform wherever you're working. Patient management systems in the NHS. And so it's not possible always to deliver content and get students engaging and familiar with platforms that they're definitely going to use when they finish. But there are platforms that the world tends to use fairly commonly for a lot of standard practice, and that's really the Microsoft suite of application, right or wrong. And so when I think about VLEs and how important student engagement is for the best learning outcome, I think about how we not only structure our VLEs, but whether they're the most appropriate vehicle for us to use, considering once you leave university, yes, you're going to use lots of different platforms depending on what you do, but really, you're never going to visit Blackboard again. You're never going to visit Canvas. You're never going to visit Moodle, Aula, and all the rest. What you are more than likely to do is use Microsoft Office 365, and within that you're likely to use Microsoft Teams. And so it seemed to me that a good way to test whether this is feasible, whether it is something that we should consider as in making an enhanced student experience, is can I replicate what I do in Blackboard in Microsoft Teams? And will that make it a better experience for them, or is it just the same thing under a different name with a different look? And so that's what I'm going to run through with you today. First, I'm going to show you a level 3 module that I lead, and obviously it sits within Blackboard. I'm going to show you what I think is a simple and relatively elegant structure for that. So let's jump right into that, and then I'll show you what I've done in Teams. So here we've got my level 3 module, Pathophysiology, and as you can see from the menu structure here, there are relatively few menu items. It's important with a student experience to be consistent, not to standardize, because standardization stifles creativity and innovation, but it's important to be consistent. We forget often that that students are not just studying one module, they're studying a suite of modules on a program. Programmatic identity is very important to the student experience and ultimately their outcomes. If we call some things learning materials and then the same thing in a different module lecture materials, and then in the other one it might just be materials, or it might be learning notes, that can be very confusing for students because they don't know where to look for roughly the same kind of thing module to module, even level to level. And so what I've got here is a relatively simple menu structure where the landing page is announcements. And if I just toggle off edit mode here so you can see roughly how students see it. This is all they see. They land on announcements, and actually what I do for announcements is video updates. I use text where necessary, if it's something short, but I tend to put up video announcements so that they get a bit of context, conversation, and a little bit of interaction from me. It makes it a bit more meaningful to them rather than just telling them stuff. I keep it short. I delete old announcements so there's not a long trail for them to go through. I want it to keep it nice and simple. And then below this we have module information and reading lists. And again, nice and simple here. A module introduction that always sits there no matter what the announcement is, which arguably I could pin to the top of the announcement section, but that would then make it unclear as to whether that's what they should always look at or whether they should be looking at the most recent announcement. We then have the module guide in, importantly, PDF format so that it doesn't automatically download and it opens in the browser. Then we have the reading list that links to the library for any suggested or core textbooks, and that's really all we have for the module information. We then have the learning section, which is very simply called learning materials because it's not teaching materials, it's not lectures, it's the materials they need in order to either engage with the scheduled teaching sessions or to learn themselves. And if we just jump in here, again, I've kept it relatively simple. It's a semester 1 module. There are 12 weeks of teaching, and each teaching week has its own folder that contains handouts, recordings, PowerPoints, all that sort of stuff. Because it's been an online year, and to keep things nice and simple when they go in and reduce the number of clicks, under this learning subsection I have the link to join the online lecture. Now you may do this in Collaborate. I personally lecture in Teams at the moment, and so this would jump them to the Teams lecture that I have scheduled. They can also get it via their Outlook calendars, and they can normally, if it's me teaching, also find a copy of that link in the relevant folder that has me teaching on it. Then we have an assessment subsection that has 2 separations. Normally I would have one that has the coursework and the exam in the same content folder, but again, because it's been an online year and their exams were done online open book, as they have been for a lot of the sector, I separated them out just again to reduce that number of clicks and to reduce anxiety when arriving at the module for the exam specifically. So within the coursework information and submission, we have tips and tricks from Central University services. We have information about the brief, the marking criteria they're working to, and then at the time would have been the submission area. Within the exam, we would have had the submission area, again the marking criteria, the questions, bit of advice, and some thorough exam guidance, as well as the actual exam question would have appeared at the time. We then have the teaching team. So there's an easy way for them to both see who the module leader is and the areas that I teach, but also a link to my staff page on the university website, and then the same thing for my colleagues on the teaching team. We then have study skills that jumps you out to the library support area for some key skills such as referencing, advice on writing and that sort of stuff. And then the well-being page, of course, because that way, if you have this on every module, it's easy for students to find it rather than having to search the university webpage. It's just an easy one-stop shop for the module, but also things that are key to their success on the module, which would be this area here. And that's really all I've got. Nice and simple, easy to do. Now we're going to jump over to Teams. Now, you might find in Teams that you've got loads of them sitting there because a lot of people have been added to Teams across particularly the past year. In my opinion, a lot of Teams have been created and populated with members erroneously. They're not being used as collaborative workspaces. They're not even being used as task and finish groups for particular projects that are then deleted once the work is done. They're being used as file repositories and ways of notifying members that there is a new file. And that's not what Teams is about. Teams is about an online collaborative working community. And actually, that's kind of what a VLE is about as well. A VLE has to integrate with your student record system for quality assurance and reporting. And at the moment, we don't have that in many places in the sector with Microsoft Teams because we already have VLEs in place. There are some kind of hybrids that you can do where you start in Blackboard and you launch out to different platforms. Launching to Collaborate. It's within Blackboard, but it's a tool that they jump to. You can do this by jumping to, say, Zoom lectures, of doing that from your VLE. You can take them to YouTube, you can take them to Teams, all these different kinds of places. You could make a Facebook group for online discussion. and jump to that from a link within your Blackboard, Moodle, Owler page, whatever it might be. But Teams actually, having had to adapt quite quickly to an increasing number of competitors and having more and more people working remotely and continuing to work remotely, has increased a lot of functionality and has made improvements. And it's something that makes improvements all the time. VLEs make improvements all the time, but there are certain things that Teams can do that I feel might be beneficial. So let's jump into that and see what we've got. So here in Teams, I have all the teams that I'm a member of and that I'm an active member of. Down here in Hidden Teams are a whole bunch of other teams that I've been added to, but that don't actually do anything. They just act as file repositories and notifications, really. There's not much in terms of synchronous chat and collaborative work going on. What I've done here is I have created a class team, which I'll show you briefly in a moment how to do that, with the module name of the module that I just showed you on Blackboard. And all I'm looking to do here is see if I can replicate what I'm trying to achieve in Blackboard through the functionality that Teams has. I'm not looking to duplicate or mirror what I've got in Blackboard by having it be a carbon copy in Teams. I'm looking to use what it is I'm trying to achieve in Blackboard through Teams itself. And so I've got here a pathophysiology team. It is a class team. It's prefixed with the automatic coding that my institution uses, and I've given it a little avatar that says a little bit about what the module is about. And we've got a corticus here for the sort of medical iconography, and that just gives them a bit of a hint. And you have that with things throughout Teams that you're a member of, just so that at a glance you can see what you're looking at. Now, as a member of staff, you've probably got dozens of teams. You've probably turned off the notifications because it gets a little bit intrusive. Now, when you've got all those teams, you can either hide some of them, modify the notifications for particular teams, but it doesn't have to feel overwhelming to have all those teams listed. It's better to encourage better practice with whether a team should be created and whether you need to be a member of it or not, and that is a wider discussion to be had another time. But what you can do as a student is only see the teams that you're on modules, because it's unlikely you're going to be on many more teams than those that you're studying if you had your modules in Microsoft Teams. So as a member of staff, you might have a whole bunch of teams, and it's up to you which ones to expand, which ones to hide, which ones to turn off notifications, and which ones to just remove yourself as a member. Because ideally what you'll see are the core teams that you're continuously working with, and then the modules that you're an active teaching member of. And it's easy to remove yourself or add yourself to those teams if there's a joining code, or indeed if you've been added to a module, you don't teach on it anymore, you can then remove yourself. And so really what looks like a very cluttered menu list there doesn't have to be, it can be just those that you need. So what I've got here is the pathophysiology team, and you can do that by join or create a team, click on create, and then choose a class team. And that's very important because of the tabs it brings with it and the separation of staff and students that is automatic. Every team that's created comes with a general tab, a general channel. A general channel has posts, files, and then for a class team, a class notebook, and those are the three standard ones. For each channel that you create, you get post, files, and notes. Now the general channel I am treating as almost the announcements section of Blackboard. When they click on the general channel, because it is a chat discussion, that's where I can announce things, introduce the module, leave messages, and generate discussion about the module in general. What I then use is, instead of having a long menu structure with multiple content folders, I use the general channel for all the generic stuff about the module. So here we would have posts for the chat and announcements, files for any general file storage such as module guides and rubrics and things like that that are generalized. And then you can create, there you go, class tabs, and then you can create tabs of a whole series of things to suit whatever you need to do. One that I'm a big fan of is of a website, and you can link to any website you like, and here it is just here, with a URL. So we could create a tab, give it a name, and paste the link in there. Now this could be to a particular content area in your Blackboard module. So you're using Teams as a launching pad to Blackboard, and that could be a way of linking to assessment submissions so that it integrates with your student record system so that marks are reported appropriately. But you're launching from this more easily recognized and easy to get to grips with interface. You can post about that if you want to. If you're just setting things up, I advise you uncheck any posting things, as you don't want to fill your discussion in that channel with notifications about stuff that's appeared. It should all be very simple in the top menu. So that's the general one there, and that's where I would have a tab for, say, teaching team, links to wellbeing through those web links, and so you've got a grid-like way of this is the module channel, and the stuff across the top is the stuff that's generic to the module that you need to know. The rest of the channels here, I've created one for each teaching week of the module. Now actually in this case, I've created one channel for each of the major systems that we cover, because some of them are multiple weeks. So global burden of disease is teaching week 1. Neurological diseases is a 2-week system, and therefore it has a channel just for those two, and it's an easy way of the students going to the wider information about that area. So if we go into global burden of disease, there we go. I've put up an announcement saying that I've got the handout and the slide deck of the lecture for that week. Now ideally you would put it up ahead of time, and you could indeed store it in the files section of that channel, because then they know that the lecture material for that week is sitting there. It's not in the general tab, it's not a generic files thing, we're not using it as a file dumping ground. What I've actually done in this case, as a personal favorite, is these are links to OneDrive. I've just added hyperlinks to the text that take them to the version that's stored on my OneDrive for Business. The reason I've done this is so that they get the current version in real time. If I make a change to the slide deck, if I make a change to the handout, they can download the latest version without me having to overwrite the file in the Files tab or indeed upload it. And I find that incredibly useful for teaching materials. The other thing you can do here, of course, is a new conversation to post the recording to the lecture, any interesting YouTube videos, and indeed to start a discussion about that lecture. So we can do that there. Please do post any questions about this week's lecture. Now this is where things like tagging can be incredibly useful. I could tag the entire module, which would include every member, or indeed I could tag individual students or individual staff members, or indeed subgroups of the whole module cohort that I've created using the tags function. So here we have manage tags, and this happens in any team. You can create a tag by giving it a name and then typing members of the team so that they're added to it. So if I created a series of tutorial groups or assessment groups, I could create tags, populate them with students, and then tag that particular group to notify them of something specific without everybody getting pinged. And that's a good way of managing notifications. I've done this for each of the weeks. And what I would also likely do, because it is so important to students, is to make a separate channel for the assessment. Automatically show it to everybody, add it, and now it's appearing at the bottom here. Now this is where I could put a post giving the brief of the assessment, files related to the assessment and how it works, and most importantly, and I'll show you this in the general channel, adding things like assignments via one of these apps. And I'll show you that in the general tab here. So up in the general tab, posts, files, class notebook, and assignments. Now on the assignments tab, and this isn't something that's enabled for everybody at UE where I work, but in the assignments tab, this is one that you can create a new one, and you can edit ones that you have already got. Okay, we can change the assignment settings to change the notifications, the default times, whether they go to calendars, that sort of stuff. what I'm going to show you here is the post for the assignment that I created, and the students can click on it to view it. And it opens up the assignment there. Now, if I was a student, I would be able to look at all the various brief details. But as a staff member, if I click on Edit Assignment here, this is all the information. You have to give it a title. There's a brief for it there. There is a marking criteria, a rubric that I've added. And so if we just click on this briefly, and this gives the various bandings and the categories that I'm expecting. So we have argument, reading, structure, evaluation, and subject knowledge, and all the descriptors for the different bandings for each of those. You can download it as a CSV to use elsewhere. It's 100 points possible because it's just marked out of a percentage. You can then give it due dates, times that it's due in, and you can also have it added to their calendar so students get a notification that they have an assignment coming up. I also at the time elected to post a notification in the channel that it sits in, which is general. If I did it in the assessment channel, which is what I would do normally outside of this experiment, I would both create the assignment and post a notification for it in the assessment, but also in the general channel because it is the general one with an announcement, and that's what I want them to see. Now, the beauty of Teams, of course, is that you can see if there's something new to do or read by a channel becoming bold, and that way you dive in wondering, is it a message, is there a file, have I been tagged in something? You'll also get notifications up here in the activity as to whether you've been tagged or mentioned or anything like that, and so it's very easy for staff and students to constantly monitor. Once the work is marked, you can then go to grades, and the students will be able to see their grades, and most importantly staff will be able to see the grades because it would link and show everybody that's listed. Now, this team doesn't have any students added to it because it is simply a sandbox, but you can export that to Excel as well, and that means that you can still integrate it with Blackboard. You can either send the Excel spreadsheet to your administration team, or in the case of Blackboard, you can download the Grade Center, add the details of those marks to the Excel file that it generates, and re-upload it in order for it to be mapped across the student record system. So there's still ways of using both, but while having the far more community-like Microsoft Teams structure. And so students would reply to this chat about the first lecture. I can add videos, I can start the meeting, add things to calendar, all the normal Teams functionality for them to do. And of course, as more and more third-party apps become available, we can use things like insights, channel calendars, document libraries, and quizzes and surveys using things like Microsoft Forms in order to interact with students synchronously, not simply when there's a lecture. So that's what I've started playing with, and as I said, I haven't added any students yet because it's just an experiment, but it seems to me that it's a way of using a tool that students will inevitably use, using a suite of tools that students will inevitably use once they graduate. It's a way of getting them prepared early, getting them used to posting, getting them used to netiquette, to posting questions that will apply to everybody in a general chat, not emailing an individual lecturer with a question that doesn't only apply to them. About getting people involved, getting other staff responding, and just making a better community while delivering a nice, clear, simple way of providing the content, of teaching within Teams, and of doing assignments, because those are really the big things. Information, community, delivery, and assessment. And all of those can be done within Teams with a little bit of imagination. So have a play around, see what you think, see if it works for you. Do post anything in the comments below, any questions, any suggestions, and hit that subscribe button. Okay, thanks very much. See you soon. Bye-bye.